Canada faces a tap water crisis. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Today we have some breaking news that is shocking people all over the country. Reports and investigations are coming to light that show Canada is in the midst of a tap water crisis. This isn't in just remote areas either. Cities from Toronto to Montreal are all being affected. According to Global News, hundreds of thousands of Canadians could be consuming tap water laced with high levels of lead leaching from aging infrastructure and plumbing. Everyone should care about this for a couple of reasons. First of all, lead exposure has a swath of negative health consequences: loss of memory, abdominal pain, anemia, kidney and brain damage. There's even articles citing a reduction in IQ, or, in extreme cases, death can ensue. It's also been proved that lead can cross into unborn babies' bodies through their pregnant mother. There's a lot of loss that comes with lead ingestion. The bottom line is you don't want to encounter excess lead in your water, especially if you're cooking or drinking with it. So what's the issue causing all of these lead problems? The water that leaves the treatment plants located in your cities is typically fine. It doesn't contain lead. The problem occurs when that water connects to your pipelines though. There's also evidence pointing to, aside from the pipes, even fixtures like faucets themselves are contributing to the problem. They may have lead components in them. So when asked, some of these cities responded by saying that some of the hundreds of thousands of underground pipelines that are factors in the issue are not planned to be replaced for decades to come. They basically said that these pipes are there to stay. Another factor that complicates the matter is that some of these pipes cross into private property, so it's not even within the jurisdiction of these cities to immediately do anything. The city would need cooperation from the landlords who own this private property, and presumably they would have to pay for these changes themselves, while the city handles the pipes in the public areas. You would really need both of these factors to be in sync, because you can replace all the pipelines in the public domain, but if you have the ones on private property still containing lead, not much would change because these pipes on the private property are presumably the ones closest to your water sources. They would still be tainted. Realistically, you can't rely on the landlords to collaborate, so the city would need to incentivize them, either through grants, paying for these repairs, or giving them tax breaks. Doing it out of the goodness of their heart might not be realistic for a large percentage of those people. Following this, a team of journalists conducted a test of tap water in 11 Canadian cities. Within that, 12,000 water sources were tested. Around 33% produced water that exceeded the national safety guidelines for lead. That is 1/3. It's a pretty big chunk. Global News pressed some of these municipalities who had these bad results, and they admitted that they don't even know how many service pipelines are within city limits due to inadequate record keeping. So in other words, they don't even know how many of their pipelines are outdated because they don't even know how many pipelines exist within their jurisdiction. They also cited a lack of requirement for cities to even do these kind of testing on a regular basis. That's another red flag. Well, maybe it should be a requirement. When it comes to public health matters and safety, I don't see why we should leave it to chance. You can attribute the problem at least partly due to what was stated here. These cities lack records to even understand the scope of the problem, and they don't even know which pipes are public and which aren't. It's asinine. They also don't even have the proper motivation to test anything because it's not mandated. It's shocking to grasp how incompetent the government can be in certain instances. This is one of those times. Who really thought it would be a good idea to not mandate record keeping and periodic testing? Now we move on to the federal government. A 2017 report stated that at least 500,000 homes across Canada had olden pipelines. Those are likely to be the most at-risk residences due to lead buildups. Now, let's look at some particular examples that will illustrate how widespread and severe the problem is. Do you remember Flint, Michigan? The US was dragged over coals for having cities with tainted water. According to samples taken in Montreal, Regina, Saskatoon, Moose Jaw, that's a very Canadian sounding city, and Prince Rupert, BC, these locations have lead levels equal to or greater than that of the likes of Flint. So based on media standards, this should be worldwide headline news right about now. Let that sink in for a moment. Some of those are pretty big cities and they have issues like that. It's crazy. In terms of solution, there was one that was proposed in this Global News article. Toronto went through a period of massive lead issues back in 2008. Nearly half of their tests exceeded the provincial standard. So what did they do? They started adding, and I think it's called an orthophosphate to the water, which is a non-toxic substance that helps stop pipes from corroding. If they don't corrode, the lead stays in the pipes and doesn't leach into your water. Now, in today's world, across the city, only 2% of homes fail to meet the lead threshold, so presumably it works, but it's still unclear as to the side effects of this substance. We know it reduces lead breakdown and corrosion, but what else does it do? Happened in 2008, so now we'll start seeing the effects of that. So that's one way to tackle the issue. The other is to just replace the pipes and mandate a standardized testing structure. Not having a federally mandated practice lets the provinces create their own widely varying procedures. It's not the best idea. For example, in Quebec, water testers ran taps for 5 minutes before collecting a sample. They essentially flushed the pipes with this practice. They only recently decided to change that policy. The only reason why they would do something like that, trying to flush the pipes, is to obscure the results. Nobody runs their tap for 5 minutes before consuming it or using it to cook with. It's an unrealistic standard that they've set. Now look at Montreal. Currently, they predict over 300,000 residents may be affected by lead-tainted water. I have to ask, if they had a more standard approach that was reasonable, would they have been able to identify the issue sooner? Also, in Saskatchewan and Alberta, they registered high levels of lead, but in those provinces there is no mandatory test result publishing. They did not have to share that data with anyone. In Edmonton, 33% of households exceed lead limits. Now, Nova Scotia. In Halifax, nearly a third of households also exceed the limit. There's a pattern here. In Ontario, the numbers are even higher. As many as 50% of households exceed the limit in some cities. Windsor is apparently one of the worst off, according to the report. In BC, you have a similar trend in places like Prince Rupert. So, what are the implications of all of this? First of all, people are going to start questioning the tap water in Canada. It's not a good look. People will lose faith in the water system, and they have to resort to plastic bottle alternatives. They have to buy water that's packaged. There's been so many environmental strides as of late to move to more sustainable practices, and one of those has been using a reusable bottle and refilling it via a water fountain or the tap. People are going to question that habit now, given this news. It's bad for the environment, but to them it's likely a needed trade-off, because when compared to the possibility of lead poisoning from your taps, this is the best way to avoid that. This is also especially true in older homes where the problem is heightened. It also looks silly when cities lack data to make meaningful calls and provinces vary widely in terms of water treatment testing. It's like Canada isn't even on the same page internally. People are doing random practices, running the taps for 5 minutes before testing it, different protocols here and there, but the problem exists across all provinces. Nobody's really figuring out the solution here. Lead pipes were banned from construction in 1975, but we still have lead-lined pipelines causing issues today, and also fixtures. Those were outlawed later on. The federal government really is too passive in all of this. They need to unify the provinces and cities and standardize our practices here. These issues existing in countless cities across Canada, some of which are not even remote, is completely asinine. It should not be happening in 2019. Some may say that certain indigenous communities have had water issues for so long already, so it's nothing new. Well, that is true, but those are two very different matters. The fact is, in remote communities, the water issue is complicated 100-fold. Once you build infrastructure there, who maintains it? Lots of those indigenous communities are remote, and servicing them is neither realistic or financially feasible. You have the harsh winters to think about, the lack of roads, the distance from city hubs and technicians who can actually do these repairs and maintenance. We need tailored solutions for communities like that, and they need to be able to self-sustain them. That's the key here. The entire discussion is being bogged down with people waving around money and virtue, while not thinking about the consequences. They want to build up the latest infrastructure while it's not feasible. There is very little thought that goes on to that, and it's a dire problem that needs a specialized approach. If you imagine for a second what is needed to properly maintain these systems, the intricate waterways, and compare that with how large Canadian cities can't even do it properly, you begin to realize fast just how complicated the issue is, and maybe it's not the best idea to force upon that infrastructure onto remote communities. They need a remote way to deal with the water problem. It is a problem, but these politicians are not thinking about it strategically. Contrast that situation with cities like Montreal, with lead comparable to Flint, Michigan. That's the largest city in Quebec, and they have issues like that. That same system would collapse in a smaller community, especially one that is remote. So, one thing is clear though, and that is water is an issue for Canada. It sounds odd to say, but that's the fact here, especially given these new findings. The government needs to move on this as soon as possible, because right now, there's too much to lose. People can get sick from it. They might just throw away the entire idea of sustainable water drinking. They'll revert back to plastic bottles, which come with their own issues. If I were to create a checklist of things the government has to do, the first thing right now would be solving the problem as fast as they can, but with a sustainable solution. It can't be a short-term issue and just push it back into the future. Maybe saying, we'll do X and it'll prolong the issue for 5 years. No, you fix it now the right way. The second thing is to get rid of the provinces being able to do what they want with water testing. It has to be mandated. It's not like water will be deemed clean in one area and not clean in another. We are Canada, it's the same country. Why are people allowed to do different testing in different areas? It makes no sense and it creates problems. You have to mandate testing, mandate systems, and make sure everyone is following suit with that. The federal government has been far too complacent and allowed the provinces and the cities to do what they want with issues like water treatment. And now you're getting data saying that these cities don't even know how many pipelines are running through their municipality, and they haven't done testing in so long because it's not mandated. They are literally calling for a solution, and they're telling you what they need. So, the government should listen and administer that. If the provinces put up fights, it should be taken to court. The province's autonomy should not come before the public health. I keep referring back to these silly situations, like waiting 5 minutes to test the water, or simply just not revealing the data, like in some provinces. That can't go on. We already see the aftermath of such decision-making processes. In some of the cities that were tested, 33% of the households are facing these issues. The federal government confirmed that 500,000 households across Canada, at minimum, have olden pipelines that are lead susceptible. If the government cannot even afford to provide clean drinking water for the bulk of their citizens, it's a problem, and it's not an indicator of a successful country. This has to be fixed right now. So, I'll keep you up to date on the latest developments of this. It is breaking news and very shocking, so hopefully the government is ignited and they move fast on it. That now brings me to the end of my conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.